Police officer was acting in self-defense when he shot and killed an unarmed veteran. Today we heard from dueling experts whether Robert Olsen was justified when he killed Anthony Hill in 2015. 11 Alive's Ryan Kruger is live outside the courthouse tonight, and he joins us right now in the midst of a driving rainstorm. All yours.
All right, Jeff. Yeah, so the judge is going to have to decide which expert witness is more credible. Is it the police instructor who said that what former officer Robert Olsen did was wrong, or the college professor from Valdosta State who argued that the killing of Anthony Hill was justified because Hill posed a deadly threat? Today was day 2 of this immunity hearing, where Olsen is arguing that he acted in self-defense whenever he shot and killed Anthony Hill 3 years ago. Here is what we know. The prosecutors brought a police instructor by the name of Greg Webb, who works in DeKalb County Police Instruction, and he says that officers like Olsen receive training from its situations how to de-escalate a violent situation. He also says that there are non-lethal options available to officers, which he argues Olsen should have used. Meanwhile, defense called Valdosta State professor Dr. Darrell Ross, who testified that in this type of situation, when Hill was running toward the officer, he became a deadly threat.
They get to within 5 feet of you and you yell stop twice. Are you then, would you then shoot that person twice?
Based upon those facts and circumstances, I would not.
Under the circumstances and the limited reaction time, using deadly force was appropriate in this situation.
So the way this hearing works, if the judge is convinced that what Olsen did was self-defense, he can throw out the murder charges before the trial even begins. The judge did not make a decision, and it's not clear on when we will have some sort of decision on this hearing. Coming up tonight on 11 Alive News at 6, hear from the defense, who are arguing that Anthony Hill's background as a decorated war hero is part of the reason why Olsen is charged with murder. Hear that story coming up at 6.
All right, a lot of
Live in
questions.
Decatur, Ryan Kruger, 11 Alive News.
And it's